I see you didn't do the avatar stuff either, James.
I did. I was just strolling about quite the thing, and then thought, oh, I better head through to the lecture room. It's almost like real life.
I couldn't get that bit to connect, so I was spared. I couldn't choose an avatar anyway.
It's quite good fun.
Yeah.
Okay, we've currently got 18 in the meeting here. There's quite a few more yet to come, so we'll just hang on a little bit.
Is there any way of gathering them, calling them all in that gather town thing?
Yeah, there is. You can put out announcements. I think Gillian's been doing this, putting out announcements on Gather Town to move your way to the lecture theatre and join the Teams call. I think there's probably only a couple left now.
There's actually still 20 people on Gather Time.
Yeah, but that's the total. Most of them are already in this meeting, Snay.
You can't get a virtual sheepdog to run around the places and chase them in.
Mm. Yeah, I think we can probably kick off, to be honest.
Get lost in the room.
Hi, John. I shall shut up.
So you're sharing your screens now? Is that the starting point? I assume somebody is probably chasing people in the other part of the.
Yeah, I think most people from Gather Town are now in this Teams call, John. So I think you can kick off.
Yeah, was Snay not going to show the slides for the background?
Are you seeing slides at the moment?
No.
Oh, I can see holding slides on the screen here.
No, I don't know if anybody else can.
Yeah, I've got what looks like one of Snay's holding slides. Says next meeting Wednesday, 18th of August. Is that the one, Ian?
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah.
It's odd. It's important the speakers can see the slides. They're talking to them.
That's okay. I think I'm right in saying speakers will be sharing their own slides.
Okay.
I'm not seeing Snay's either, though, John, if it's any consolation. I don't know what's happening.
Is Snay there?
It's really on that Gather Town screen instead of this one. Can't be too far, you'd think. Oh.
Some people can see them on Teams. It may well be the people that are the organisers can't see it.
I can see it here, so not anymore.
Not anymore.
So anyway, it's very good to have an Orkney focused meeting. Hope everything, I'm sure the weather's as nice up there as it is down here. or is it?
I defer to Graham on that point because I'm sitting
Yeah.
in Glasgow.
It's a bit overcast here in Kirkwall, but
Yeah, there's been a cloud sitting in the tape for the past 2 days, so while everyone else has been cooked, we've been looking at mist.
Yeah, we're expecting a lot more sun.
Oh, there she is.
Sorry, I'm having IT issues. Okay, sorry. Yeah, John, do you want to just kick off? I'm having IT issues this end.
Okay, shall I share your slide? Okay. Okay. So welcome to the July Eden Campus Industry Club. As I think everybody is aware, this is an Orkney focused event. There's a lot of things happening in renewable energy and clean energy and hydrogen in Orkney. So it's really pleased to have you both here. So first speaker is James, you taking the lead for?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
For the present about EMEC. And I haven't got your title to hand just now.
No worries. I'll flick it up. Can you see slides? It doesn't look like you can.
There it is now. Okay, so Jim's going to present on the hydrogen islands, putting EMEC research and development in context.
So I'm having an issue with my Teams as well today. Just seems to be a running theme. So my camera's going off when I share. So that's why I've disappeared. Hopefully you can see this, and indeed you're seeing the right screen, the presenter view.
Yeah, that's it now.
Okay, good. So I'll just assume that all's well unless you shout otherwise. So thanks very much, John, for the introduction. Yes, indeed. I'm going to run through what we've been up to really at EMEC in Orkney and how the hydrogen work that we're doing fits into the broader energy context. I'm hopefully setting the scene a little bit for Graham, who's going to look at some of the broader themes and perhaps some of the opportunities as well. So I am indeed James Walker. I'm the Hydrogen Development Manager at EMEC. My job is to find new opportunities for us in hydrogen research and development and to bring as many possible partners and collaborators up to Orkney as I can. So this is a really ideal opportunity to be speaking to you today about essentially that. So I'll just briefly run through who we are, what we do and why, and then I'll go through a little bit of detail on some of the projects we've been undertaking. So as some of you will be aware, but in case there are others who aren't, EMEC is the European Marine Energy Centre. We were set up in 2003 as a centre of excellence for marine energy research and development, with an idea that we would become a focal point for innovation in Europe in these areas. And I think it's fair to say that's been the reality. We've had a world-leading number of marine energy devices come up to Orkney for test on both the wave and tidal test sites that I'm showing the locations of here, and that's what you see in the top row of the images, or that's a smattering of some of them that you see in the top row of the images. We've also, in the more recent years, been involved in some hydrogen projects that have come about as a result of challenges in integrating the vast renewable power production capacities that there are in the islands as a result of their natural conditions and weather conditions. So That's essentially the focus of my talk this morning, or afternoon now. And then as a result of, I would argue at least, some of the hydrogen activity that we've been underway, that we've been involved in, we've started to what is essentially diversify into a range of other both technology areas, but also areas of working. So we've been involved in some consultancy activities where we're helping others to solve similar problems to those we've been addressing in Ortnery. We're also increasingly looking at the next step of growth of hydrogen and the hydrogen economy. So thinking about, for example, offshore hydrogen production, offshore hydrogen storage makes a lot of sense in an island or a marine environment. We're increasingly looking at floating wind because, again, it makes sense in a marine energy context. And we also have an increasing importance in where we see future opportunities around marine transport. So Ortnery really is an ideal place to think about how we might begin to address maritime decarbonisation. So we're really seeing a lot of opportunities there. So that's us. Just very briefly, wall of text here, I know, but worth setting up that what we exist to do is to aim to deliver the net zero energy transition that I think we're all working towards. So in our case, what we're looking to do is reduce time, cost and risk associated with adopting these technologies. The way that we specifically do that, or the way that we seek to do that at least, is through our living lab concept. So we are seeing what we do as a real add-on to some of the more fundamental research that takes place elsewhere. So we're providing opportunities for others and also ourselves working to build on prior work to see what happens when you transition from a lab environment or a test stand environment to a real world setting, and generating data and increasing understanding around real world challenges in adopting new technologies. So in doing so, we come up against and work within and seek to inform regulatory environment and regimes, and we're also quite active in looking at standardization internationally and thinking about how we do this all safely and how we ensure that the work we're doing contributes to others understanding how they can undertake similar innovation activity safely. So just briefly further in terms of context on hydrogen specifically, why we're looking at hydrogen and why Ortnery is an ideal place to look at hydrogen. So what I'm showing on the left-hand side is a screen grab from what's called the Ortnery Active Network Management System. And this is looking at the serious imbalance between the power that can be produced renewably in the Ortnery area on the right-hand side relative to the power that's actually demanded by users in Ortnery, and showing that we have a serious excess in capacity that at the moment, because of network constraints, is largely curtailed. So hydrogen emerged a few years ago now as a key means of looking at how we might approach that question or approach that challenge from a different angle. So whether we could produce hydrogen when power supply is high and use it in a manner in which it can support decarbonisation of lifeline services or essential power system services in times where power supply is lower than demand. So as you see on the furthest right hand side of the slide, that's really where we look at the key sectors that are of interest in Ortnery and other islands. And with that in mind, this is just a figure I use occasionally to describe where I or we see future opportunities for hydrogen in the energy system. And in Ortnery, and as in other islands, we really see the three at the bottom being the key. So industry is a bit of a nominal term in a fully rural island environment, but we have some industry that will need decarbonised, and that's where some of the interesting distillery projects come in that are always quite popular and hopefully quite interesting. I've mentioned maritime transport already. We also need to think about buses within the islands, and then also aviation, both between and to and from the islands. And we also, as a result of the power system context that I mentioned, we need to think about whether there's a role for hydrogen in providing some flexibility there. So we've got a good number of potential areas to carry out research and development, and also hopefully to actually meaningfully contribute to development in the area. And that's essentially what you see here, I hope. So this is a summary of the research and development program that we have developed in hydrogen. So this is building on the marine energy work we've done previously. We're looking at how we integrate marine renewable energies as well as significant onshore community wind. And that led to electrolyzer deployment, and that meant making hydrogen. And then essentially, having done that through a project that I'll mention in a moment, we then, with partners, had to think about what we actually do with that hydrogen, how we store it, first of all, safely, how we move it from A to B, how we make it available for use in any given use context that I've mentioned. And that's led to a number of different avenues, both in terms of just actually physically understanding how you transport hydrogen from, in our case, one island to another, but also, as you see on the far right at the top there, a refueler vehicle that has been quite an interesting bit of innovation for us that I'll talk more about in a couple of slides. So that's the storage and handling side. We then have to think about how we're actually going to use the hydrogen, which applications are most appropriate, which make most sense in the island context, which are most important from an energy transition perspective. And we've been really fortunate to work with a whole host of technology developers and a really, really willing local innovation ecosystem to essentially sample a whole host of possible applications for hydrogen. And we have a really diverse, interesting, and often realistically quite stressful innovation program that you see snapshots of here, where we're trying lots of different means of deploying hydrogen essentially to see what happens. So looking at whether shipping is the right application, for example, or thinking about whether the left-hand picture is some range extending vans where hydrogen is just there as a top up essentially on an otherwise battery electric vehicle. And that seems like a logical application, but we need to think about whether that works in practice, and that's one of the applications in one of our projects. So that's the general ethos of the work that we're doing. So I'll just run through a few focus areas for us, and hopefully these will set out what we've been up to, also where we're going next, and ideally where those listening can think about coming to get involved if they're so inclined. So the key, I'd almost say, pillars of the work that I've described there have been a couple of very big innovation projects that have been underway in Ortnery that other organisations have led and that we've played a supporting and at least in my mind key role in delivering and developing. And these have really looked at essentially what I've just described. So that entire hydrogen economy or hydrogen valley, or there's a few different terms around for how you might look at this, but really it's making the hydrogen from locally appropriate power, using that hydrogen in a locally appropriate way, and understanding what the infrastructure is that gets you from that A to the B. So in our own case, we're making hydrogen on the Isle of Ede, just off our tidal test site, and transporting it by ferry across to Kirkwall Harbour and the Orkney mainland in general, really, so that we can fuel those range extending vans, and so that we can power a fuel cell at the harbour to provide power to vessels when they're in dock. And in the future, hopefully providing all sorts of other opportunities to look at different applications in the other sectors that I've mentioned there. So what we're doing there in these projects is putting the building blocks in place to develop out that hydrogen economy and understanding where the challenges are, where the outstanding innovation is, where the opportunities for process improvements are as well. And then underscoring all of that is this focus that I've already mentioned on health and safety and doing things in as cost-effective, efficient, and indeed safe way as possible. So it's a real team effort across a vast number of organisations in the local area and further afield, and that's what I like to describe as the Orkney hydrogen economy, and that really underpins the rest of what I'm going to describe this afternoon. So the other aspect that for me as an energy system geek essentially is something that's just really very interesting to look at. This is our site on Ede. I mentioned the tidal turbines testing offshore. We've also got a community wind turbine locally. This is where the first electrolyzer was deployed through the surf and turf project I mentioned there. And that in and of itself, those three elements, already makes a relatively complex ecosystem or energy system in a sort of 2020s context. But then we've also been really fortunate to have in this is an Arriva, they're now called Elogen electrolyzer, that we will welcome to the site next year now, through a European project. And this is a picture of an Invinity Energy Systems flow battery that we're also going to be having installed in the very not too distant future, so the next few months now, with a significant recent support from the Scottish Government, which we're very grateful for. And what that begins to be, certainly in my mind, is a really complex ecosystem of energy system innovation. And we have to work out how we're going to work all these assets together, how we're going to control them appropriately, how we're going to, when we're going to charge the battery, when we're going to discharge the electrolyzers, these kind of elements that, to my mind, make for an awful lot of really interesting energy system research opportunities. And well, just a wide range of activities that we're looking forward to undertaking over the next few years, and certainly welcome the opportunity for others to come in and test out new ways of doing things, and even new business models in this area too. I've got a couple more on the more technological side before I look at some sort of broader themes. So I've mentioned already the refueling aspect. So we were fortunate to work, or are fortunate now that there's HighFlyer 2, but we have been fortunate to work through the HighFlyer 1 program with partners Euravia, Intelligent Energy, Fuel Cell Systems as well, who we contracted to provide the vehicle that you see in front of you. And what we were doing in this project was developing the refueling and hydrogen handling, both knowledge, understanding, and technical capability to support testing of a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. Aircraft, and that has manifested in the refueler that you see in front of you. And as I say, a great deal of experience and understanding in how you successfully manage the equipment, how you efficiently deliver hydrogen to an aircraft, and how you do that safely and within a regulatory regime that's naturally very restrictive, and so it should be. So this has been a really interesting project that's exposed us to a completely different sector than we would ever have expected to be operating in as a marine energy test centre, but a very, very impactful and innovative and interesting project, and one that's, I would like to say, spurred on a fair amount of innovation locally, where we're now looking at Ortnery as a key location to conduct future aviation innovation. And I know Graham will pick up on that in his talk in a moment. The other side that I've already mentioned is the maritime situation, or the maritime sector. And this is a really, really important one in any island setting, in Orkney particularly, getting between islands as an archipelago, getting things to and from the islands, and ensuring that essentially normal life can proceed as you would expect. And with that in mind, it's also a key source of emissions, because almost all vessels currently operating, as far as I can tell, globally are fueled by hydrocarbons. So we need to think about what will replace those, and we're trying to play our part in using the facilities and the willingness and the interest and enthusiasm in Orkney to provide opportunities to test future systems. So this is one project that we've been involved in and supported and hosted to a large extent, that's called HyDime. That's hydrogen diesel injection in the marine environment. This was an Innovate UK project. It formally closed recently, but we're still waiting for at-sea trials of the system that's been developed. The idea here is a retrofit solution. So this is a Ulemco engine or engine attachment that has been installed on board. This is the MV Shappensee. It's a ferry, an operational ferry in Orkney. And the idea is that the retrofitted engine attachment will be able to handle the injection of hydrogen into the diesel engine so that we can displace diesel. It's relatively straightforward, ideally with locally produced fuel, of course. So that's kind of what you see over here. This is us making the hydrogen that we deliver then to the vessel, hopefully to reduce its operational emissions. Now that's the theoretical idea. That's what we would like to be doing. We've had an awful lot of challenges around getting the regulatory approval to actually undertake this testing, and also to demonstrate that this can be carried out safely on board a vessel with passengers in the future. And that's been a huge learning curve for us. I would like to think also for the regulator, because it's such a novel area to be dabbling in, and the regulation around marine operation is so strict that there is inevitably going to be a bit of conflict there. And hopefully we've managed to navigate that in a way that is supporting the development of that regulatory regime. And I guess one of the key roles that we've played as a research centre rather than a technology developer is being able to take a sort of middle of the road approach and mediate a little bit, and try to help to facilitate the conversations that are required to build the safety case that will hopefully bring us forward in this area. So I'll just, last couple of slides, just sort of drawing on everything I've said, really. We've also been fortunate in the last few years to pick up relatively small but nonetheless very interesting roles in some very big European projects that are looking at essentially how the experience of Ortnery and other places that have dabbled with hydrogen in a fairly early or forward-looking way, how that can be rolled out and deployed in other island or other environments. And it's just a list of very difficult to remember project acronyms here where we're doing essentially that. So we're providing advice to communities elsewhere about how they might adopt hydrogen as a means of decarbonising activities. We're also, this is something that we do well, I think, in the marine energy space. We work with technology developers who are at a relatively early stage to understand the market that they're operating in and the development curve that they're on, and the means through which they might support their activity through grant-funded innovation activity. And in the last few years, we've been able to apply that experience in the, well, I would say hydrogen sector, but also the allied sectors. So looking, as you can see in the first bullet point, around floating wind, and particularly the integration of floating wind and hydrogen, and then also looking at techno-economic assessments for offshore hydrogen production. I mentioned that that's an area of emerging interest, at least. So this is some of the less technologically orientated, but still, I think, very useful and interesting work that we're doing. And then finally, on that note, we are just in the final stages of a research study that we're working on for the Scottish Government, looking specifically at collaboration opportunities between French and Scottish organisations in the floating wind and hydrogen sectors to come together to work on shared technical challenges and to look at how we might support an innovation ecosystem that would provide opportunities for those organisations to collaborate and to essentially develop those supply chains that we know we'll need for these sectors to become commercial and successful. So we have just delivered the final draft of that report. It'll be published shortly, and we're really delighted to have been working with the two partners you see there, RCG and NSC, to deliver that work, and also with a vast number of organisations, I think many represented today, to inform that research. And that's been a really interesting project for us. So that was a whistle-stop tour through what we've been doing in hydrogen innovation, and I'll just leave this on the point of saying, I'll sort of work backwards. We're really mindful that we are a part of this innovation ecosystem and this innovation landscape, and that many others represented today are too, and we'd really enjoy working together with other organisations and seeing additionality as being really important. So understanding where each organisation's key strengths can bring together to something bigger than the sum of its parts. And hopefully the slides already have shown the vast number of partner organisations who are involved in this work. It's impossible to get all these icons, logos on the individual slides, but it's a real team effort, and we're really grateful to work with so many of these organisations in such a constructive way. And that's a good place for me to stop and say the door's always open. Please get in touch with any ideas you'd like to explore about how we might work together. So thank you very much.
Okay, we'll be open for questions after Graham's presentation. So Ian will take the lead on that, but you might help if you want to put a few questions into the chat. So thank you very much, James. That's brilliant. Very pleased now to welcome Graham Harrison from Highlands and Islands Enterprise, who's going to present on Orkney future developments and opportunities.
Can I ask, can you see my slides now? Or?
I'm very pleased to say I can see your slides.
Thank God for that. Thanks, James. I mean, James has done a lot of the hydrogen ground, so I'll try and skate around that and add bits and pieces to it, but also map out some of the kind of reasons why that happens in Orkney and where we're going with a lot of the initiatives and hopefully some of the big stuff that's coming down the track that might be of interest to collaborators, certainly. I'll hopefully start. So that I will do an obligatory one slide on what high is, and then the energy things that we're involved in as an organisation. Why is Ortnery such a kind of hotbed of R&D in particular, and some of the current projects that are on the go within the islands, and the Islands Deal projects that will be of interest, and looking forward to ScotWind and potentially the transition of oil and gas in Orkney and elsewhere to low carbon, zero carbon future, which we have a big interest in. So just basically, along with Scottish Enterprise and South of Scotland Enterprise, we are and SDI, we are the government's economic development agency. We our remit does include communities, and that's a vital part of what we do, particularly in the energy field. And we've done that over 50 years, probably, when we were the HIDB, before that Islands Development Board. So, so there are a strong communities priority. Also, businesses. The focus in the last 18 months has purely been on resilience. I would say a lot of money has gone to keep businesses afloat in many sectors, but now hopefully pulling away from some of that to look at kind of more growth and productivity focus. Creating the conditions, a lot of infrastructure developments, which we do on our own hand, but also in partnership with organisations like local authorities. We've got 6 across our patch, which covers Argyll all the way up to Shetland, and Moray in the east, and the Western Isles in the west. So lots of territory to cover, and you'll not be surprised to learn that because it's the windiest parts of the country, the renewable energy resource is a key to some of the future opportunities that we see, certainly around EMEC's sphere of activity, around offshore wind, floating offshore wind as well, onshore wind still, and hydro still important in various parts of our territory. So we're looking to the future in terms of decarbonisation, circular economy, and the blue economy in particular, where we're quite a rich scientific base across the patch, and to space and beyond. Not in Orkney particularly, but in fact we've got 4 proposals for space centres across our patch. I think in Orkney we'll just stick to the boats and pick up the bits that fall into the sea as they are launched. Government emphasis is on net zero green jobs, basically, and fair jobs. So we have to take that into account in everything that we do. So that's enough of the advert. On the energy side, it's a key focus across all our priorities. Local supply chains for the wind sector in particular, but as tidal and further down the track wave develops within those sectors as well. Ports and harbours infrastructure key to a lot of that, and as I mentioned before, community involvement in renewable energy has provided a lot of benefits to communities, particularly in the more remote areas and islands, who can earn some income from their own wind turbines, etc., and use them for beneficial projects. The region as a whole is a hub for research and development. Across a number of spheres. Wave and tidal is a particular focus within EMEC. I mean, our own involvement with EMEC goes back to 1999, I think, when the idea was first mooted in the UK Parliament. And I was technically EMEC's first employee, albeit unpaid, when we set up the company in 2003. So a long association. We're still a member of the company and still respond to the various challenges and bright ideas that EMEC come up with consistently, and seek public backing for a number of these initiatives. Wave Energy Scotland as well is there. That's a direct subsidiary of HI, which the government asked us to set up to develop the wave sector following a couple of false starts in this country. And so there's been quite a long 4 or 5 year programme now of technology development there, culminating in 2 homegrown Scottish devices that will be tested at EMEC. Well, one is in the water, the one in the middle of the pictures at the bottom is already in the water in Ortnery, and there's another one coming very shortly. Why is Ortnery such a good place to do all this kind of activity? Geography for a start. We're obviously at the crossroads between the North Sea and the Atlantic, so that's great for tides. We're right in the teeth of the gales and the waves, so lots of natural resource. The islands have been long involved in servicing oil and gas through the Floating Oil Terminal and its many North Sea catchments. We were at one point the epicenter of the UK's effort to develop onshore wind back in the 1980s. I remember going up the top of a 3 megawatt machine in the early 90s, which is now unfortunately demolished, but a huge machine at that time. And the company that was developing it, or the consortium, UK consortium, the business was eventually sold to the Danes, who got all the IP, and the UK put their money into nuclear and the like, I think. So there is a history here of pushing the boundaries of technology at an early stage. The community themselves are highly energy savvy. Farming community, as soon as one farmer knew that there was a pound to be made in having a micro wind turbine, they all had them, and we got 1,000 plus before you knew it, and the SSE couldn't cope on the grid. So they are early adopters of new innovation, not just in energy, farming practices, pushing 5G applications at this stage as well in terms of communication. So all sorts of stuff that we like to do. A couple of things that EMEC have been involved in that James didn't kind of sing their praises, including testing an underwater data center for Microsoft, which hopefully they'll take forward as a concept in terms of saving heating costs on data centers, and various other initiatives involving communities, etc., with surplus energies. I mean, generally the islands, through their history, wartime involvement, a mixture of people coming through, are very outward-facing and international collaborative. Prior to COVID, we had hundreds and hundreds of overseas visitors coming to see and to learn and to share experiences with us in terms of what's going on in the energy sector alone. Universities, Heriot-Watt have been here, not just the local University of the Highlands and Islands. Heriot-Watt have also had a presence in Ortnery for almost 3 decades now, probably around that time, and doing valuable science around energy and social sciences and fisheries, etc. So a lot of knowledge there. We've now got RGU with a growing presence as well in the islands. The islands are a microcosm of what goes on in the national grid system. We've got one at the moment, a couple of cables in and out, small cables, but it is largely a closed system, so we can experiment and see what happens, and then these things can be repeated elsewhere, with the support of the council, who bankroll quite a number of developments themselves and partner with others, including ourselves. Necessity, James kind of alluded to the move into hydrogen by EMEC. That was purely because they couldn't get the power away from ED, where the tidal site was. So we needed to do something to absorb that power, and therefore got into hydrogen some years ago now. The active network management that James also mentioned was, again, we had too much power in the islands. So with the help of Strathclyde University and Smarter Grid Solutions, we came up with a system that allowed more renewables on the system at different times without having to wait for massive grid upgrades. So it was ahead of its time, probably regarded as the first smart grid in the country, but probably inadequate now, and hopefully we'll have an interconnector before long for more renewables. So moving on, a few current initiatives. Reflex Ortnery, some of you may know about it. It's 28 million in total of investment in a demonstration of potentially the energy system of the future, possibly up to 600 electric vehicles coming additional to the island. We've already got more EVs per head of population in most places in the UK, coupled with chargers, home chargers, office chargers, batteries and solar systems for businesses, and an electricity tariff suitable for the islands. It's one of these kind of ironies that although there are more renewables in Orkney than anywhere else, we were first to reach 100% electricity usage. We have the worst fuel poverty in the country as well. So working to try and alleviate some of that issues as well. The whole thing tied together by a flexi-grid system, or flexi-gird as it says there, apologies for that, which is a kind of innovation of a local startup, Solo Energy, which is now part of the SMS group from Glasgow. So Reflex Orkney is just getting going, really. It was delayed by COVID, so the public rollout of some of these assets is really just started in the last few months. And I know EMEC are a big part of the project as well, but other local companies are heavily involved, as are more national players like Shell Energy and the car leasing companies, etc. So watch the space for further activity on the Reflex front, and hopefully something that can be replicated in other areas, as I'll touch on later. The Sustainable Aviation Test Environment, this is quite a recent development led by HIAL, our regional airport operator owned by the government, the Scottish Government. But this development is funded through the UK Government's Future Flight Challenge. It's a whole mixture of low carbon aircraft, drones will be tested in what potentially could become an EMEC of the skies, but we're keeping it fairly low key at the moment. The Zero Avia plane that EMEC were working on was due to be here, but I think we'll have to wait for the second version of that one, the larger version, maybe to be tested, trialed here. But the one that you can see there, the green one, is the Project Fresson conversion of a Britten Norman Islander, which was going to be an electric plane, but recently switched to hydrogen power. I believe we are getting an electric plane to come and do a few test flights, possibly from next week. Actually, it's Ampere, a California company. Their aircraft is on the final leg of its journey from the States via Rotterdam and should be here very soon, hopefully to try out at Kirkwall Airport with a few flights over to Wick, hopefully. So it's all part of a wider initiative which will hopefully see the Highlands and Islands be the first carbon-free aviation region in the country, or if not Europe, and complementary to what the Scottish Government's wanting to achieve in that respect. And indeed, one of the projects that the government have funded through ourselves is a hydrogen combustion engine, which has been installed at the airport very recently, and will provide heat and power to the terminal buildings and one or two. And there are other projects through Reflex that might look at the ground-based infrastructure there, just to try and make the entire end-to-end operation of aviation more carbon-free. The Islands deal was recently announced. We have secured the promise at this stage of 100 million of UK Government and Scottish Government funding combined, which with other contributions will reach over 335 million of total investment. The graphic there, it's not great, but hopefully you can see that there's a column there for each of the three island groups involved in the Islands deal. And then there's some cross-cutting themes down the side there. And there's a list of individual projects for each island under each column, and there are three cross-cutting, cross-island projects: the Island Centre for Net Zero, the Creative Islands and Wellbeing one, and the Talented Skills strand, basically. I'll put on to the next one, which is Orkney specific Islands deal projects. I mean, net zero is a recurring theme throughout the Islands deal, but no more so than in the Orkney projects. So listed amongst the Orkney projects, which have not all got the sign off yet from government, so that's why they're still pretty draft at the moment. A future fuels hub to be located in Scapa Flow, which is regarded as a kind of key asset for the country. Has been in 2 world wars as a major anchorage and naval base, but going forward, hopefully more peaceful uses. The Future Fuels Hub, don't have a lot of detail on it at the moment. It's largely privately driven with backing from the Orkney Islands Council. And it will happen once Orkney Islands Council build what they call the Scapa Deepwater Quay, which is a facility that they want to build at the east end of Scapa Flow to service the offshore wind sector, hopefully in the future, and possibly oil and gas rig maintenance, etc. Initial focus for the future fuels thing was LNG, but I believe now it's kind of moved on to more or less carbon intensive fuels, possibly looking at hydrogen and ammonia for shipping being the main potential market for what they're doing. Orkney Research and Innovation Campus, this is the second phase of development in Stromness there of a joint venture between ourselves, High, and the council. Basically, lots of academic and business space based around, at the moment, recycled school buildings. And the second phase is to provide more space for some of the Islands deal projects to take place and to grow further the work that goes on there. Excuse me, around EMEC and Heriot Watt and various other companies involved in primarily the low carbon space. So in addition, we have a World Heritage Gateway project, which is largely aimed at sustainable tourism. Our tourism product is very popular in Orkney, never more so than right before COVID, when we were the #1 cruise liner port in the country, destination. We won't have this one cracked by the time cruise opens up again, because it's next week, I think, with the first large ship coming in. But the whole idea around that is to provide greater facilities to protect the integrity of our World Heritage Site, the heart of Neolithic Orkney, and the other key heritage sites that we have, so that they're not ruined. So there's a bit of infrastructure development, a heavy emphasis on carbon reduction in the tourism product, and spreading tourists around, making sure that transport is sustainable, etc., and using technology to reduce impacts on footfall on certain sites at certain times. So there's a strong low carbon net zero twist to that as well, possibly working towards a net zero carbon neutral World Heritage Site in due course. Orkney Community Vertical Farm, we're working, Orkney College are leading that one in conjunction with the Hutton Institute and a company called ISG, I think, from Edinburgh, who provide the technology for vertical farms, so that this would be a facility in Orkney that will grow crops all year round, and the USP for this one is it'll be entirely powered by green electricity, potentially involving storage and batteries and potentially hydrogen. So that one is yet to develop. And the last one, possibly the most important one, is a kind of £16.5 million initiative entitled the Island Centre for Net Zero. So that this will be based in Orkney, but will cover all 3 island areas involved in the deal. All 3 island councils have kind of pledged to try and reach net zero by 2030, which could be very challenging, but with James's initiatives and others, there is possibly a chance that we've cracked electricity here certainly, and heat and transport are the other two biggies that we need to work on. So the Island Centre Net Zero, it's been led by one of James's colleagues at EMEC, Matthew Finn, along with Professor Susan Crumdick, who's the chair, recently appointed chair in energy systems at Heriot-Watt. We will be based in Ortnery once she gets here en route from New Zealand at the moment. So, and the idea is that this would be a kind of catalyst and a kind of hub for all sorts of research into different areas of decarbonisation, basically in island situations, in remote areas, not only in the three areas that are involved in the deal, but looking to replicate and to partner with other island areas right across the UK, Europe, and the wider world. So lots of potential demonstration projects in there, and looking to pull in other research funding as that develops. I'm conscious of time, so I'll just quickly whiz on to two kind of future developments that are very key to the future of Ortnery. The ScotWind leasing round, which closed last week, I think, and we're awaiting the outcome of that. As you can see from the map, there are some potentially large sites either side of Ortnery and in close proximity. And we, or at least Orkney Islands Council as the Harbour Authority, have been in conversation with a great many of the potential bidders for these sites. We don't know who will be successful until later in the year or early next year maybe, but based on that, they are well down the track with their £80 million Scapa Deep project, which would host the Future Fuels Hub as well. And the wider Harbours Master Plan, which will see other developments in Kirkwall and Stromness and possibly at Lynas, the old naval base on Hoy as well. Don't know yet as to what would be the main ways in which energy would be exported from these sites. It may well be by interconnector to the mainland or to the island here for bulk conversion and shipment to hydrogen or ammonia or something easier to handle. So it's quite an exciting time with that. We'll wait and see who the winners are on that side of things, and depending on that, things could move on apace with large-scale infrastructure developments in the islands here. Finally, oil and gas transition. We have the Flotta oil terminal in Orkney here. Again, it's been here since the 1970s. 10% of the UK's oil has flowed through there over the years. Doesn't help our petrol prices, which are still the highest in the country. But the current operators, Repsol, Sinopec, have stated publicly that they're very keen to transition to a lower carbon future, and there are plans to transition this site and the oil fields which it serves to a much lower carbon future. Potential here to develop and transition this site as it still operates. It can be done, can move partially to zero carbon hydrogen or something similar. There isn't a lot of detail. The company hasn't gone public yet on what the details. I can't say too much because they're in consultation with their workforce at the moment about some necessary changes that would have to happen to put it in a position to move to a lower carbon future. Inevitably, that might mean redundancies and change roles. So we are waiting the outcome of that. But hopefully, that depending on the outcome of the ScotWind leasing round as well, there may well be a major development there to look forward to. And that's really all I wanted to do. There are other developments on the go in the Orkney around distilleries, as James mentioned. There's a green ammonia plant being set up linked to one of our wind farms, and there's never a shortage of inquiries about doing stuff in the energy space. So, we're always keen to hear people's ideas in that respect. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, hopefully.
Many thanks, Graham. That's excellent. I'd like to thank both the speakers. Very nice talks, and also to thank Snea and Gillian for setting up Gather Town. I don't know if you had a time to wander through that, but something of an interesting diversion. So, Ian, are you able to take the questions now?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been monitoring the chat boxes. There's no specific questions. There's been an interesting exchange between Patrick and James, which I think they'll take offline separately. Just one question from me, if I could. I think maybe both Graham and James could respond to this, which is, I think Orkney is quite a unique place, isn't it? There's some really interesting set of circumstances in Orkney that lend it very well to this kind of development. So I suppose the question is, what's transferable? How transferable is this really innovative work? What could the rest of mainland Scotland in particular learn from what you're doing here? James, I think you're muted.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering whether I start or Graham.
So I'm far away. You've jumped in now.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I suppose from my perspective, I should probably have said at the beginning that I live in Glasgow and I have actually never been to Orkney because I joined EMEC at the beginning of the COVID period. So and my first visit is next week. So it's always quite interesting thinking about trying to represent this area that I feel like I know so much about, but I've never actually seen with my own eyes. So I'll maybe hobble my own answer with that perspective. But certainly from where I'm sitting and thinking about the work that we're doing, I like to think that we have a very unique set of circumstances that make our work easier to justify than it might be otherwise, and that give us a really excellent foundation to build on when we're, in my case at least, bidding for work and submitting grant applications and so on. So that makes, you know, the story of Orkney and the energy system context in Orkney give us a really good and useful bit of context to work with. But I think a lot of the work that we're doing in its reality or in the results that we're finding could be replicated in most island environments. You know, a lot of the marine energy, although Orkney is a uniquely well-placed position and geography and has unique resource, there's no reason why aspects of what we're doing couldn't be replicated in terms of the marine energy stuff. Then on the hydrogen side, I think there's a good applicability of a lot of the use case work that we're doing, if nothing else. So a lot of the lifeline services that certainly I mentioned and Graham picked up on as well around shipping and aviation, those are realities in any islands or actually in any rural setting, if it's not waterborne transport. So there's an awful lot of transferability in the findings that we have, and I think that's the key thing. That's what we tend to be quite outward looking with, is recognizing that the lessons that we're learning can be applied elsewhere, and what we've found works should also work for other environments. So. Yeah,
I would just add to that. Say I don't think what goes on in Orkney, what works in Orkney, wouldn't be exactly replicable everywhere, but bits of it would be. And you can easily see we've got lots of things here that haven't worked. So equally, lessons learned from that are good pointers to others. I mean, some of the European projects, I think it was a Surf and Turf or Big Hit, maybe one or two, had Malta as a follower a partner, so they were just studying what was going on here and saying, well, what could we do that works in our own situation and doesn't work in our situation. We've had the Inter-American Development Bank delegations with various Caribbean islands having a look at what goes on here. So I think, you can't take exactly the same thing from Orkney and replicate it, but you can see people will take that and say, well, I know how I can make it work in my own country or particular situation. So I think, the Orkney is unique. Reflex, for example, there's a plan to roll it out to other island areas, the Western Isles and Shetland. They may decide to take some aspects of it and not others. It just depends on the geographical, the commercial realities, and the government situation in each of the jurisdiction. Really, I think we've had various partnering or twinning arrangements proposed at different stages, where there'd be an ongoing dialogue and learning. One of the most ridiculous ones was between Ortnery and a Chinese district that had about 5 million people, and in Ortnery with 22,000 at the other side. So I don't think we had the resources to keep that up. But maybe Scotland as a whole can do these kind of things once we're up and running again. But I think that there's much to be learned, and indeed just the sheer the getting on the ground and seeing what's happening can make a huge difference to that. But things like the hydrogen refueler can be rolled out to any airport, basically, or railway station, or whatever you want to do to power. So I think there's academic exchanges, all these kind of things could be a large part of that. The intake at Heriot Watt in Stromness is truly international most years, maybe not this year so much, but and whilst many of them stay and take up jobs in the renewable sector, a lot of them go back to abroad and take that learning and philosophy with them. So.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Graham. I've noticed also, James and Graham, there's a contact in the chat box there from Donny McMillan at the Western Isles Council, who are also involved in a project around the decarbonisation of islands. So clearly there's a lot of transferability there that you might want to pick up later. Thank you. Sorry, John, back to you.
I got a couple of questions, but I could start with one anyway. First one you'll like at least. James, you said you didn't see Orkney as being an industrial place, essentially. But actually, if you look at the industry, it generally goes where the energy is. So I guess to both of you, could you see Orkney as being a new centre for energy with sort of wind and tidal resource, a new centre for industry rather, for producing chemicals? Ammonia is a good example, of course, for large scale production. So you do a lot of integrating things like the rest of us are doing, but actually there are possibilities that do massive things.
Do you want to start, Graham?
I think there is a lot of potential. I mean, there are some industries that we probably wouldn't be a good fit for Orkney. Certainly hugely labour intensive industries. We have there are limits to our infrastructure for a huge influx of people. We're not going to start a car plant with 5,000 employees, right away or anything like that. But I think the right industries in the right place could make a huge difference to Orkney. And whilst we haven't been involved in any manufacturing of these devices, other than probably with Orbital, and they only do the clever bits here in Kirkwall, and the steel rolling, etc., is done in places like Dundee and Fife, etc. So I think, yeah, we wouldn't try and corner the market and everything, but I think if we can trade on what we know and what we can do here quite successfully, if it can be automated and doesn't require wholesale change to the way of life here in Orkney to actually accommodate it, then I think people here would be receptive of that. Yeah.
I think I would maybe just briefly touch on the ammonia aspect, because that's a very good point, John. There is some discussion around the role for Orkney as a potential fuel hub in the future, not so much just from an innovation perspective, but actually supply. So given the amount of traffic, there could be sufficient demand to justify a relatively significant local production in a manner that I guess wouldn't have been appropriate prior. So yeah, that's an interesting question, because I tend to think of it more as, I recognise I've got this image on my slides that doesn't necessarily seem all that applicable to someone sitting in central Scotland who knows Grangemouth is 20 miles away, and that's a much more obvious application. But you're right, that's a past way of looking at things, and yeah, Certainly, EMEC would welcome opportunities to try just about anything. So we'll see where we get to. I think it's probably the short answer.
Kappa Flow might be better connected to the rest of the world than Grangemouth.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole debate around green ports and free ports and things like that, and I think Scotland's taken a slightly different line to the UK government generally. Scapa Flow, I think, has been thrown in the hat as a potential green port, but what that would mean, it's difficult to say at this stage. I mean, we don't think we'd be offshoring lots of manufacturing jobs just to import stuff. Stick a label on it and export it or whatever. It would be more green orientated, I think, and hopefully much more sustainable for the community.
Briefly, Dan, Hydime, you said it was going to be lower emissions, but how are you checking the emissions?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So we wouldn't be doing so on board the vessel, I have to say. So it's a fairly simplistic idea that if you displace the diesel, then you've displaced the emissions, which is obviously a bit, well, it's not a bit, it's very simplistic. I think in our case, because we've been making the hydrogen from exclusively renewably powered electrolysis, we feel that there is a comfort there that we can say that that is decarbonisation. But in a broader sense, that's a very good point. Not least of all thinking about the potential for increased NOx too with the combustion. So it's complex. We're looking at the potential for ex situ testing of the engine to actually really understand that. So looking at putting it on a test bed and running it, putting it through its paces and actually measuring. And I think that would be a really useful experiment. But I suppose it's, as with many of the hydrogen bits and pieces of work that we've done, we're looking at the first step, and then it throws up all these other questions like the NOx emissions angle. I don't know that had necessarily entered the thinking at the design stage of our project. I'm sure it's on the agenda of those making engines, but there are just these extra questions that fall out of this type of activity that is what for me makes it really worthwhile doing, that we find all these extra things that we need to resolve. That's quite a political answer to the question, I know, because I'm essentially business development here, but yeah, I hope I've answered it both directly and enough. Yeah.
We've got a good NOx removal catalyst, by the way, in our lab.
There we go.
It's patented, so
good.
I'll pass it back to Ian. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We probably need to be wrapping up any moment soon, don't we? I didn't notice one more question came in from Paul Connor, and Paul, you might need to come on and expand on this a bit. It says, what typically limits projects? Getting enough constant supply or ensuring enough paying demand? Paul, do you want to just expand on supply and demand of what?
Of energy. So there's lots of, it's easy to make the electricity, but is there a demand for the hydrogen or the electricity once you've made it? But what's limiting? Is it actually making or converting the energy or using it afterwards?
I can start. I mean, that's been the chicken and egg question since we got involved in hydrogen, really, I think 4 or 5 years ago. I think EMEC's initial thoughts with hydrogen was we'd just convert it back to electricity and put it in the grid when we can. But I think after some research, we found that the most valuable uses or more valuable uses were in transport, etc. But then you had to get it off the island of ED and into the mainland. So that involved in developing a whole supply chain of logistics, etc. Yeah, I mean, there is plenty of interest in using hydrogen instead of a fossil fuel, but having a reliability of supply has been an issue, and that's been part of the learning curve. Is that electrolyzers don't often work as reliably as you expect them to, particularly in a kind of semi-marinized atmosphere of a remote island. So yeah, I think there is plenty untapped demand for use of hydrogen, particularly in distilling and other industrial uses, heating generally, but until now, certainly we're only now getting towards a reliable supply, and see then what can be done with transport, etc., in the islands and elsewhere. I mean, it can be produced in larger quantities at the moment elsewhere, but it's maybe not the greenest of hydrogen. So it's a balance between getting it from the right source, climate-wise, and marrying the supply to local demand, or indeed exporting it if the demand's elsewhere.
Very comprehensive, Graham. Thanks. I don't know that I have much to add, other than perhaps just to say that from sorry.
A long-winded saying, I'm not sure.
Well, I think from my perspective, I would like to say that the demand is the key challenge, but that's just because we make hydrogen occasionally, you know. So I think substantial or guaranteed or commercially orientated demand is the way I see it in a Scottish context, at least, is probably the key challenge. I think we could arrange supply, but then I've heard those who are looking to actually commercially supply hydrogen, or rather, I suppose the other way around, commercially use hydrogen, saying the opposite. So I don't think there's a good answer or a direct answer to the question. I think it's both, and also the challenge of the supply and the demand being in different places, and to Graham's point, and actually being very expensive to move the hydrogen from A to B in that context. So we're not there yet. Certainly, we're very fortunate that all the hydrogen supply that we do is through subsidised grant funded projects. So the commercial reality can kind of be insulated essentially, and we're just hoping that we can facilitate enough innovation that the rest falls into place, which is quite a comfortable position to be in, I have to say.
Yeah, I think that's where the government's hydrogen action plan is aimed at, is trying to move it to a commercial reality of supply being able to meet demand and vice versa. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, both of you, very much indeed. I think we've probably run out of time for any more questions. John, over to you to wrap up. Do we have any announcements we need to make, things we need to bring to the attention? Sneh, can you pop up your reminder of the next session, please? Next Industry Club meeting. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything yet. The next Industry Club we will promote through the usual channels over the next couple of weeks. It's, I think, the 18th of August. Pop down, next slide, please.
Sorry, it's just disappeared on me.
Well, that's okay. While John's sorting out the slide, I'll send out the reminder. So it's 18th of August, next Industry Club session, and do we have a speaker yet? Somebody remind me if we've got a speaker yet for it. And then the other it's a hydrogen accelerator special event. And similar timings to today, 12:30 to 2:30. So we'll probably have some gathering time for the first half hour. Presentations will start at 1 o'clock, as today. Couple of other announcements. If you want, when you leave this session, you will drop back into the GatherTown platform. And you'll notice on the GatherTown platform, there's various bits of information about Eden Campus and about funding opportunities for SMEs and others involved in energy-related activity. I did notice that Patrick had helpfully dropped into the chat box at the beginning of the session today some information we've just received from Scottish Enterprise about a low-emission vehicle funding scheme that they've just announced. And otherwise, I think that's everything we need to tell everybody for today. So thank you very much indeed, all of you, for participating, and hopefully see you at the next Industry Club session. So hopefully when you leave this, you'll be able to go back to your GatherTown platform. An update, Patrick, an update on an earlier announcement from Seed gives further details. Okay, thanks very much, Patrick. You'll be contacting people with that information too about the Scottish Enterprise Call. Okay, thanks everybody, and have a good day. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Ian.